Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video, and welcome to a very exciting video, in fact probably my favourite video of the year. Today I am going to be doing my Victober 2019 announcement video. Now, if you have not heard of Victober, Victober, also known as Victorian October, is a month-long readathon that takes place every October and celebrates Victorian literature. This is, I believe, its 4th year running, which is really exciting. And the hosts are me, Ange from The Other Pages, Kate Howe and Lucy the Reader. We are all very passionate about Victorian literature and very passionate about Victober. So as I said, Victober is a month-long readathon. It takes place from the 1st of October to the 31st of October, so for the whole month. And basically, the idea is to read as much Victorian literature as you can. And when I say Victorian literature, what I mean is British or Irish works of literature that were published or written between 1837 and 1901. And this can include any forms of literature, so novels, short stories, poetry, plays, any kind of form that you like, as long as it is a piece of Victorian literature. As with all previous years before, we have 5 challenges, one from each of the 4 hosts and then a general challenge. And we're also, as with last year, doing a group read-along. We also have a Goodreads group, which I will link down below. So what I'm going to be doing today is talking you through our challenges and then giving you some recommendations specifically for my challenge. On the other 3 hosts' channels, they will also have Victober announcement videos up today, where they will be giving you recommendations for their individual challenges. And then I'm going to talk you through a few sort of video ideas I have for the month as well. I'm very excited for Victober. Is that any surprise? The only thing you really have to do to take part in Victober is to read a piece of Victorian literature, but as I said, we do have 5 challenges to get you started. Ange's challenge is to read a book by a Victorian female author, and as a bonus kind of challenge to that, a Victorian female author that is new to you. Kate's challenge is to reread a Victorian book. My challenge is to read a Victorian book that is under 250 pages and or a Victorian book that is over 500 pages. Lucy's challenge is to read an underrated Victorian book from the same year as your favourite Victorian book. And then our general challenge is to try reading by candlelight. You do not have to read an entire book by candlelight, because that might be a bit tricky, but if you can, find a candle and read a bit by candlelight as they would have done in the Victorian period itself. Then, as I said, we do have our group read for the month. On the Goodreads group and on Twitter, we put up polls of a few choices of authors to see what people wanted to read. On Goodreads, there was a tie between Mary Elizabeth Braddon and Oscar Wilde, but on Twitter, Oscar Wilde definitely won outright, so we felt Twitter could be the tiebreaker and that we would go with Oscar Wilde. Of course, if you want to read some Mary Elizabeth Braddon this month, please do. Something by Mary Elizabeth Braddon could obviously count for Ange's challenge, and I'm pretty sure some of her books are over 500 pages, so some of them could also count towards mine. But we are going to be going with Oscar Wilde, and we thought that rather go a bit more mainstream with the picture of Dorian Gray, we would be a little bit slightly left of field and go with some of his plays instead. So we thought it would be fun to host a read-along of Oscar Wilde's plays, 2 of them in particular, thinking that Oscar Wilde's plays are a little bit less commonly read than his novel. Also, a lot of people, I think, when they think of Victorian literature, think of Victorian novels and not like all of the other literature that was going on at the time, so we thought it would be fun to have a play read-along instead. So we will be reading 2 plays as a group in the month of October. The Importance of Being Earnest from the 1st to the 6th of October, and then from the 14th to the 21st we'll be reading A Woman of No Importance. And our basic schedule for this is like an act every 2 days. I will put a proper schedule in the description and also over on the Goodreads group, and hopefully some of you will join in. The Importance of Being Earnest is probably Oscar Wilde's most famous play, and it is a brilliant one. It is very funny, very entertaining. It follows a man called Earnest, although is he really called Earnest, because he might also be called Jack. When he's in town, he calls himself Earnest, but when in the countryside, he calls himself Jack. And the play basically follows him and several characters around him, and the various like difficulties and complications that end up occurring due to this sort of mix up about names. It is really funny, really entertaining, definitely a play I would recommend. And then the other play we'll be reading, A Woman of No Importance, is a much less well-known Oscar Wilde play, and is actually my favourite Oscar Wilde play. It's one of my favourite plays of all time. I think it's incredible, I love it so much. It is very powerful and very feminist, which is really cool as well. It looks at various characters in sort of upper class society, as Oscar Wilde plays often do, specifically focusing on a mother and her son, and what happens when her son kind of gets involved with a new set that she is not happy with him getting involved in, which ends up kind of bringing out a little bit more more about her past. It is a fantastic, fantastic play. The like very, very end, the final scene is one of my favourite bits in like all of Victorian literature. It's so good. So 2 plays I would highly, highly recommend, and I'm so excited to read with all of you guys. The read-alongs will be taking place over on the Goodreads group, which as I said, I will link down below, and do please go and join if you're not already a member. But moving on to some recommendations for my challenge. Like I said, the other 3 hosts of Victober will be giving you specific recommendations for their challenges over on their channels, but here I'm going to be recommending you some great Victorian books under 250 pages and over 500 pages. And when I say under 250 pages and over 500 pages, that can be like in any edition that you find, or what Goodreads says, because obviously some editions will kind of vary in terms of page length. Now, there are a lot of books I could recommend under both of these categories. I'm actually going to be making individual videos during Victober, one on like fantastic short Victorian books and one on fantastic big Victorian books. And I've already started making a list for those videos, and there's like well over 15 recommendations. So I'm going to do those separately with a few more, but I thought I would just quickly mention a few different options today that you could go for if you were to read a very short or a very long Victorian book, or indeed both. On the shorter side, one fantastic Gothic novella I would like to recommend is Carmilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This is a Gothic vampire novella with quite a lot of heavy LGBT undertones. It's a book that I would really recommend, that I think is really gripping and very exciting. Yeah, such a good read. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is another really great short Gothic Victorian read. You're probably very familiar with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from sort of popular culture, but if you haven't read the original book, it's one I would highly recommend. It tells a story a little bit removed of a man called Dr. Jekyll and what happens when one of his inventions goes a little bit wrong. I would also very much recommend Diary of a Nobody by George and Whedon Grossmith. This is a really fun late Victorian book that is set up as a diary by this man who is very much lower middle class and kind of wants to be upper middle class, and a lot of the book is kind of the funny scrapes he gets into trying to make himself seem more respectable than he is. Another short Victorian favourite of mine is Dr. Wurtle's School by Anthony Trollope, which is about 220 pages, and this follows a man called Dr. Wurtle who runs a school and what happens when he discovers a secret of a particular couple who also work in the school. It's fantastic. Anthony Trollope looks really interestingly at kind of Victorian social and moral issues, and is a really good place to start with his work if you're new to him. And of course, if you don't want to read a short Victorian novel or novella, you could go for some plays. Both the Oscar Wilde plays I mentioned are sort of about 75 pages, I think, so definitely fitting in for this challenge, as would any of George Bernard Shaw's Victorian plays. He's another great Victorian playwright. Equally, you could go for some poetry as well. A lot of Victorian poetry you'll find in slimmer collections. My 2 sort of favourite Victorian poets would be Gerald Manley Hopkins and Christina Rossetti, although the Brontes write some fantastic poetry as well. And another thing you could do is go for perhaps a Penguin Little Black Classic. I have many of these. I'm not going to go through them all in this video, but the Penguin Little Black Classic series of books are fantastic for shorter Victorian reads. They have a lot of Victorian ones. Like I said, all of these ones are Victorian, and they tend to clock in sort of just under 100 pages. Some are short stories, some are non-fiction, some are poetry, and they have a really wide selection. They tend to be sort of £1 or £2 as well, which I always find quite useful, and I sort of collected a bunch of Victorian ones of these. I'm not going to go through all of them today because I have so many, but some of my favourites are this little book of poetry by Edward Lear, nonsense poems. His poetry is hilarious and really silly. I really enjoy it. I also really love this little short story collection by H.G. Wells, Under the Microscope, which has some fantastic sci-fi short stories in. We also have The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell, which contains 2 of her sort of gothic short stories, which are really good. And then there's also poetry by Gerard Manley Hopkins. I love his poetry. It's really, really different. There are a lot of Victorian little black classics out there, and they are fantastic. On to the longer Victorian books. I've picked off my shelves some of my favourite big chunky Victorian classics. Dickens is a great author to go to if you want a long Victorian book. These 2 are my favourites, I'll Meet Your Friend and Dombey and Son. 2 fantastic novels. I'll Meet Your Friend follows the story of a fortune and what happens when the man due to inherit that fortune dies, sort of where that fortune goes to next. And Dombey and Son tells the story of a family. A man called Mr. Dombey has a son and a daughter. He loves and adores his son, but he doesn't value his daughter because she is a girl. And the book kind of looks at gender in the Victorian period and so many other fascinating things. pages. Two chunkers that are amazing and two of my favourite books of all time. Both of these, depending on your edition, tend to clock in at sort of between 800 and 1,000 pages. They are pretty hefty books. Another of my favourite books of all time is Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. This, I think, tends to be sort of about 600 to 700 pages and is a really wonderful read. It tells the story of a young woman called Molly Gibson and what happens when one day her father decides to remarry and suddenly a stepmother and stepsister appear in her family and change the dynamics considerably. It is a wonderful read, beautifully written, with amazing characterisation and fantastic explorations of grief. I love it a lot. Cannot recommend it enough. Anthony Trollope is another writer who wrote a lot of very, very fat books. One of my favourites is The Way We Live Now, which kind of explores 19th century society in very many interesting ways, specifically focusing on what happens with a family called the Melmots, who appear in London. They have a great fortune and no one quite knows where it came from, and everything kind of goes on mysteriously from there. It is a fantastic read, pretty hefty. My copy is just short of 800 pages, but this is a fantastic one and well worth a read. Or if you want something even more dramatic, this is East Lynne by Ellen Wood. This is a Victorian sensationalist novel and tends to be, I think, about sort of just under 700 pages long, depending on your edition. This is a very dramatic book, as all sensationalist Victorian novels are, and has a lot of different plot lines going through it. One deals with an unsolved murder and various people trying to resolve quite what happened, and another deals with a woman who sort of makes some of the wrong decisions in her life. It's a fantastic book, really gripping, such fantastic characterisation, and well worth a read. Another of my favourite big Victorian books is this. This is The Egoist by George Meredith, and this is at just over 600 pages. Now, this is not for the faint-hearted, and this is not a book I would recommend reading unless you have read quite a lot of Victorian literature, because I would say it's one of the least accessible Victorian books I've read. But if you're someone who has read a fair bit of Victorian literature and want to try something new, this is a fantastic read, and I also think it's one of the most interesting books in terms of looking at Victorian ideas of gender. This follows a couple who get engaged near the beginning of the book, and what happens when the woman in that couple starts to think that maybe she really shouldn't have engaged herself to this man, and how will she get out of this situation, and can she, because of Victorian gender power dynamics. It is fantastic, but like I said, the language is a little bit less accessible than all the rest of the books I have mentioned today, so this is possibly one for the slightly more seasoned Victorian reader. And there we have it. Those are my recommendations for my challenge. However, before I go, I did want to talk you through some of the videos I have planned for the month of Victober. I will be putting up my TBR in the next couple of weeks before Victober begins. Like I said, I'm also going to be doing recommendation videos on short Victorian books and long Victorian books. I'm also going to make a video on sort of tips for getting into Victorian literature and getting started with Victorian literature. I then also am going to be continuing on with my 5 Victorian novels about series. I have one of them planned already, and I may end up doing another one. Another thing I'm hoping to do in Victober, as long as I get the 6th Palitzer book read in September, is to do a Palitzer week. I did a Barsetshire week when I finished Anthony Trollope's Barsetshire Chronicles, probably last year, I guess, talking about each book in the series over the course of the week. And then, assuming I do finish off the Palitzer series in September, I am hoping to do a Palitzer week at some point in Victober where I talk about the 6 books in that series. Another thing I'm hoping to do this Victober is to do reading vlogs. I did this last year and really enjoyed it, kind of vlogging my reading and how I was going and putting them up at the end of every week. One thing I would like to know from you is how many reading vlogs would you like to see and how often? One thing I noticed in 2018 doing weekly vlogs for both Jane Austen July and Victober was that, like, a lot of people watched the first reading vlog and then the kind of view numbers went down in the later vlogs, and I wonder if that's because, like, after you've seen 3 reading vlogs, the 4th one is not like very exciting because it's kind of just the same with new books, it's the same thing. So I wondered if people would prefer less reading vlogs that cover more days. I don't think I'm going to do just like one reading vlog for the whole month because I think it would be like 40 minutes long, but I could do 2 reading vlogs, sort of one for the first half and one for the second half, or I could do 3, so sort of like every 10 days rather than every week, because every week would end up with being sort of 4 or even 4.5, which is maybe too many reading vlogs. So I would like to know if you enjoy reading vlogs and if you enjoy lots of them, or if you would rather see like slightly longer reading vlogs but less of them. If that makes sense. Do let me know in the comments below. And also let me know what other videos you would like to see during Victober, because as I said, I have many planned, but I possibly have a slot or 2 left depending, so anything you would like to see from me this Victober, do let me know. And I think that is all for this video. I am so excited for Victober, as I hope a lot of you are too. It is my favourite reading event of the year. I'm really excited to get to lots of Victorian books that I haven't got to so far this year, and to reread a couple of old favourites perhaps. I am just really excited to read a lot of Victorian literature and talk about a lot of Victorian literature with you guys, so do let me know down in the comments if you are going to be taking part in Victober. I really hope a lot of you are. Do go and join the Goodreads group if you haven't already. Tell me what books you are starting to think about already. Tell me which challenge you are really excited to get to and what book you're going to be reading for what. If you are talking about Victober anywhere on the internet, on Instagram or Twitter or on YouTube, posting a TBR anywhere or a blog, anything like that, please do use the hashtag Victober, so that we can find you. I will be like constantly searching for people's Victober TBRs all the way through September and October. I will also be doing Bookstagram Victober posts on Instagram, so I will link my Instagram handle down below in the description, so do go and follow me there if you would like to see extra Victorian related content on there. And yeah, I think that is actually all now. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so excited for Victober, as you can probably tell. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video. I've just realised that you can't actually see my jumper through this video, so none of you are going to know how appropriate and amazing it is that I'm wearing a Great Expectations jumper, or even how great it is that I own a Great Expectations jumper. I love this jumper. It says Great Expectations on. I'm very happy. It goes very well with my Great Expectations mug. Sometimes I do wonder if I'm a bit too obsessed with the Victorians, and then I realise that's impossible.